All right, guys, so we got an update on a story that I covered a couple of weeks ago where Israeli forces in southern Gaza murdered 15 Palestinian medical workers, then buried the bodies in a mass grave, destroyed the emergency vehicles, and then proceeded to lie to the international community in an attempted cover-up. So, in their own way at this point, they have now officially admitted to this brazen war crime. Now, as you're going to see from this article here, their idea of accountability in this circumstance basically amounts to nothing other than vapid pageantry to deflect from the possibility of real international accountability for this. So the headline here from the BBC is, quote, "Professional failures led to the killing of Gaza medics," according to this IDF inquiry. So what are they talking about here? They say, the Israeli military has said that professional failures led to the killing of 15 emergency workers in Gaza last month. An inquiry into the incident by Israeli Defense Forces, or the IDF, found a series of failings, including, quote, "operational misunderstanding and breach of orders." So this is their accountability. They say the deputy commander of the unit involved has been dismissed for providing an incomplete and inaccurate report during the debrief. So no actual accountability, right? You're just going to be dismissed from this position, and not for committing a brazen war crime and killing a bunch of innocent people, but for providing an incomplete report. This is their idea of taking accountability here. They say a spokesperson for the Palestinian Red Crescent Society, the PRCS, whose workers were killed in this, said that the report was invalid and justifies and shifts the responsibility to a personal error in the field command when the truth is quite different. And she's 100% correct there. They also say, in a statement, the IDF said that its troops opened fire believing that they were facing a threat from enemy forces. We're going to rewatch the video here in a second so you can see how absolutely ridiculous that is at face value. But the IDF said in its investigation that they found 6 of the casualties were Hamas members and rejected that there had been summary execution. So 2 things. Forensic evidence from and eyewitness testimony from what we know so far does indicate that there were summary executions based on the wounds that some of these people had. But even putting that aside, they say 6 of the casualties were Hamas members, again, as is typical, without providing any evidence whatsoever. We continue. They say the report said that the incident took place in what it called a hostile and dangerous combat zone, and that the commander on the ground perceived an immediate and tangible threat after the vehicles approached rapidly. It blamed poor night visibility, which the IDF said meant the commander did not identify the vehicles as ambulances. Another commanding officer, quote, "will receive a reprimand for his overall responsibility for the incident." So we got a dismissal and a reprimand for indiscriminately slaughtering 15 medical workers. They say journalists invited to Sunday's military briefing were shown aerial footage shot in the early hours of the 23rd of March, which showed the attacks. The footage, and this is just like dystopian and comical at the same time here, the footage also showed several other vehicles, including an ambulance, that passed by in the hour or so between the first and second Israeli attack without being shot at. So Israeli officials are saying that because they didn't shoot at this other ambulance, therefore this proves that we would never fire on medical vehicles unless we felt threatened. So because we didn't shoot every single medical worker that we came across that day, that means we're innocent. We can wipe our hands clean of this, right? Guys, I need you to understand, when you look at the video here, this is the video of the incident that we thankfully got because one of the people who I believe was killed as a part of this was taking a video on his phone at the time, which was, this video was then later recovered. But you can see in this video, it's very clear, right? Keep in mind, the Israeli military initially right after this tried to claim that there were no sirens, there were no flashing lights, it was impossible to identify that these were emergency vehicles. This is what it looked like on the ground. And they pulled up here, you can see them, right? We have the logos here, we have the sirens, we have the flashing lights, we have a guy who is wearing a reflective uniform here, and then the shooting begins. Now, these people, this convoy that showed up here that was then fired on, they were going, and the reason that they stopped at this location nearby this Israeli ambush is because they were trying to help people who had been shot before then. So the timeline of how this all played out, even according here to the official Israeli report, is that at 4 a.m., the troops spotted a vehicle, later confirmed to be an ambulance, and mistakenly identified it as a Hamas police vehicle. The soldiers opened fire on the vehicle, causing it to stop on the side of the road. The troops then approached the car and found inside 2 dead people and a 3rd living person, who they then took for questioning. So this happened at 4 a.m. They initially shot at this ambulance at 4 a.m. Then about an hour later at 5:06, the same Golani soldiers were alerted by drone operators that a convoy of suspicious vehicles was approaching them. The drone operators were unable to determine that the vehicles were ambulances, the probe said. The vehicles, ambulances, and a fire truck stopped some 20 meters from some of the troops that were waiting in the ambush, and several suspects, later confirmed to have been medics and rescue workers, ran out, apparently to treat those in the first vehicle that had come under fire. So you have the first vehicle that's shot at around 4 a.m., 2 people die. Another one is taken into questioning or for interrogation. Then an hour later, a convoy of, a fire truck and several ambulances, they show up to try to help treat the initial ambulance workers who were shot, and then they're fired upon. Then, after that, at 5:18, like 12 minutes later, a clearly labeled United Nations pickup truck arrived in the area. The troops identified that it was a UN vehicle and, against protocol, opened fire on it. The probe said that the soldiers were trying to get the vehicle to leave the area, but in the process, as a big whoopsie-daisy, I guess, fired directly at it, killing an UNRWA employee. So 3 separate instances that happened here basically over the course of an hour. Initial ambulance is shot at, 2 people are killed, 1 person is taken into custody, right? Then a further convoy shows up an hour later, and they are fired at, killing pretty much everybody who was involved in that convoy. Then 15 minutes or 10 minutes after that, a UN vehicle, clearly marked, shows up, and then that's fired at as well. We're supposed to believe, the reason I break down this timeline, is that all of this was just a big whoopsie-daisy. Oh, it was just an accident. Oops, sorry. We initially thought they were terrorists. Does this look like a convoy of Hamas militants here? Is that what that looks like to you guys? Do you think it would be impossible to figure out what exactly this is here? Like, they're actually trying to make the argument, and keeping in mind, again, they lied about all of this. Initially, the only reason that we know they lied about it is because we ended up getting this video, right? Otherwise, we might not have even known how exactly they were lying about this. But initially, they said, there's no lights on the vehicle, it was unclear, these are definitely Hamas militants. And then when that's totally and completely exposed, then they say, oh, it was like an operational failure, right? We're going to dismiss this guy because he put together an incomplete report. This is what we get. This is the same pattern every single time. Over the last 18 months, the same thing on repeat. The pattern goes something like Israel commits some horrific war crime, oftentimes in broad daylight, and captured on video. They commit the war crime, they deny it, they lie about it, they obfuscate, they try to cover it up in some circumstances, and then when it's totally exposed that they've lied about it and that they did commit the war crime, then they pretend to do some sort of an inquiry or an internal investigation because they don't want the international community investigating them, like the International Criminal Court or the International Court of Justice. So they do a pretend bullshit self-investigation, conclude that they basically did nothing wrong, there's no accountability, and then everybody moves on a day later because the next day they've committed a different crime. That same pattern has been repeated day after day, week after week, month after month for the last 18 months straight of this genocide. And there's never any accountability. Not only is there no accountability, but the United States, their primary backer and ally in this genocide, sends them more weapons. We reward them for this kind of brutality, for this kind of barbarism. Every single day, this kind of thing has been happening. No accountability whatsoever. Now, we also have here the PRCS, the Palestinian Red Crescent Society, saying that, of course, as is accurate, that this report that the IDF put out is full of lies. Full of lies. That's all that this is, guys. Now, we also have, in terms of some background on the Golani battalion that engaged in this war crime, in terms of getting an understanding of what exactly their mindset is while they're in Gaza. So if everything that I just said up until this point wasn't convincing enough for you to understand that this was intentional, that this is the kind of shit they're doing on a daily basis, here we have directly from their own mouths. So I'm going to put this on low volume here, and let's try to read the subtitles. This is the Lieutenant Colonel David Cohen, commander of the Golani Reconnaissance Unit, okay, the exact same unit that killed these medical workers. Here he is in his own words on April 3rd of 2025 here from channel 14.
לפני הכניסה של גולני, מפקד הסיירת, סגן אלוף ד', אמר דברים בעיניי משמעותיים מאוד, מגי. בואו נקשיב, תיעוד בלעדי שהבאנו.
תכלית המבצע, שחרור חטופים. זה מבצע להחזרת חטופים, גם אם לא הולכים ממש לפירו מבנה שנמצא בו חטוף. למה? מייצרים לחץ צבאי מאוד גדול, הורגים הרבה אויב, לוקחים לו המון שטח, וככה עד עכשיו חזרו חטופים. כל מי שפוגשים זה אויב. מזהים דמות, מפעילים אש, משמידים, מתקדמים הלאה. לא להתבלבל בהקשר הזה.
He says, everyone we see is an enemy. And what do we do with enemies? We kill all of them. And then we move on. Which is exactly what they did to these medical workers in southern Gaza. Now, again, this is just one crime. Imagine how many other, similar situations this battalion has been involved in over the last 18 months. Unimaginable to think about what other kinds of situations that we didn't have come to light in the same way that this one did. We also have here from the Lieutenant Colonel Ophir Adani, who is now the ex-commander of Battalion 66, giving his soldiers a motivational speech before entering Gaza last year. And his quote here is, "I want you to have a deep sense of revenge. We're going to win in Gaza. We're going to kill them, and we'll create the new Israel." So again, they don't exactly hide this kind of stuff, right? We're going to create the new Israel. We're going to take a lot of territory. Everyone we meet is an enemy. We identify them, we open fire, and then we move on. This is their own self-described mindset. This is a genocidal mindset that many Israeli soldiers and officials and politicians and much of Israeli society has in terms of Gaza. It is a campaign of annihilation. It's not a campaign to defeat Hamas. It's not a campaign, as this guy was somewhat indicating towards the beginning of that statement, to return the hostages. What a completely absurd notion. The huge bulk of the hostages that have been returned from Gaza to Israel has come as a part of deals that were worked out with Hamas, where there's an exchange of Israeli hostages for Palestinian hostages, when there's a somewhat of a temporary truce, as we saw over the last couple of months. That's when Israeli hostages have actually been returned. Israel has been killing their own hostages as a part of this genocide inside of Gaza. They've killed dozens of their own hostages as a part of the bombing campaigns. In some circumstances, they've directly shot at them. In one circumstance, we covered that story of a guy who was waving a white t-shirt and was speaking in Hebrew, and even he was shot by Israeli forces. The idea that this was ever about returning the hostages or doing a targeted campaign against Hamas, all you have to do to understand that that's not the reality is to listen to them speak. Listen to the Israeli officials, listen to the Israeli politicians, listen to the Israeli soldiers and the commanders, because they don't hide this shit. They don't hide it at all. Now, in terms of the background of all of this, of course, we've been covering stories like this, again, for 18 months straight. In fact, at this point, as of November of last year, so even this is out of date, Israel had killed over 1,000 doctors and nurses in Gaza. And this isn't an accident. This isn't, some doctor was standing in front of a Hamas militant with a weapon and we had no choice. We're talking about the direct targeting of hospitals, the direct targeting of doctors and nurses, and in many circumstances, as pointed out here by Al Jazeera, outright kidnapping and torture of medical officials, kidnapping them, taking them to Israeli torture camps, and subjecting them, as reported here in this PHRI report, arbitrarily detained, humiliated, and sexually and psychologically abused. We also have the background of just a couple of days ago, Israel striking and destroying at least part of the last fully functional hospital in Gaza. Now, saying that this hospital, this Al-Ali hospital, was fully functional is a dramatic exaggeration, okay, to say the least. There are no fully functional hospitals that are left inside Gaza, but Israel has struck and destroyed in one way, shape, or form every single hospital in Gaza. Every single one. Now, the irony of this specific strike is that this is the Al-Ali Arab hospital, okay? The same exact hospital that shortly after October 7th, when this genocide began, there was a strike on this hospital. And Israel and their PR machine, as well as American politicians as well, and their defenders, they had the biggest uproar you've ever seen in your life, insisting that it wasn't Israel who bombed the hospital, that had to be a misfired PIJ rocket, or it had to be Hamas or something else, because Israel would never dare to bomb a hospital like Al-Ali Hospital was bombed back then. And again, since then, they have systematically and intentionally, willfully, out in the open, destroyed the entire medical system inside of Gaza. Every single hospital has been bombed, on top of the fact that they're also restricting medical supplies from getting into Gaza. There's been a systematic destruction of healthcare inside of the Gaza Strip. And again, this is the same hospital, guys, that they pretended, we would never bomb a hospital. How dare you accuse us of that? That's blood libel. Same exact hospital that they've now bombed once again. Now, at the same time as this is happening, war crime after war crime on a daily basis, we have this. The United States airstrikes on a Houthi oil port in Yemen reportedly killed dozens. Dozens of people were killed as the U.S. reportedly did a double tap strike inside of Yemen, which is where you do an initial bombing. In this case, we're talking about bombing an oil port, okay, intentionally, willfully, as admitted by the U.S. government to try to apply economic pressure on the people of Yemen, right? So a war crime in and of itself. But they did a double tap strike, reportedly, where you bomb it initially, and then you wait, and then paramedics show up to the scene to try to treat some of the people who had been wounded, and then you strike again. So there were also reportedly paramedics who were killed as a part of this strike. And the other reason I bring this up, besides this being a apparent self-described war crime that was committed by the U.S. here, is that the reason that we are doing this is to justify continued support for Israel's genocide in Gaza. The only reason that the Houthis are doing the Red Sea blockade on Israel that they have been doing since the beginning of this genocide, to their credit, the only reason that they're doing that is because of the genocide. Whenever there was a temporary truce or a potential ceasefire that was put in place, as we saw a couple months ago, they stopped the blockade, right? Whenever there's peace, they will stop the blockade. All they want is for Israel to stop the genocide, to allow adequate aid into Gaza. That would end the blockade of the Red Sea. Instead of trying to do that and to apply pressure on Israel to end this carnage, what is the Trump administration doing? We're spending billions of dollars to bomb the shit out of the poorest country in the Middle East. To what ends? Because they're not even accomplishing, keep in mind, their goal of making it so that the Houthis can't engage in this Red Sea blockade. So it's for no other purpose than just sort of like a flex or a show of solidarity with Israel to say, look, we got your back. We're going to bomb the shit out of Yemen, killing dozens and dozens of civilians so that we can somehow justify your continued genocide in Gaza. And a step beyond that, there was recent reporting that the Houthis in Yemen even offered directly to the United States that we will only enforce this blockade against Israeli vessels, right? We won't even attack U.S. military ships that are in the area as long as you stop bombing us, right? The U.S. says, no, we'd rather go to war with Yemen illegally and unconstitutionally because you don't have approval from Congress. We would rather do that than simply end the genocide in Gaza, as Trump is still trying to push forward with this plan for the U.S. to essentially take over the Gaza Strip, to build, I guess, his next like beachfront hotels or whatever the fuck. So, you know, at this point, guys, and another point to bring up is referring back to the Signalgate controversy, where most of the mainstream media took that story and they're like, oh, the biggest part of this is that the Trump administration is incompetent and they're goofy and they're leaking national security interests to a journalist unknowingly, and how embarrassing for them, and we need to have a tighter grip on our national security shit. But the real story from that is Trump and his administration officials who were in that chat, they admitted that they blew up an entire residential apartment building in Yemen as a part of those strikes to go after like one mid-ranking missile guy that was suspected to be a Houthi. And they said, we've located this guy. We think he's inside of this apartment. And so they flattened the apartment to the ground, killed over 50 people in again, a brazen war crime. And the media doesn't cover that, but we're going to cover the national security aspect of it. So I'll leave you guys off with that. It's just absolute carnage day after day after day. There's never any accountability. There's never any push to try to genuinely bring this to an end. If anything, we're seeing continued escalation from the Trump administration. And as was the case under the Biden administration, full and total complicity in every single one of these crimes.
Politic guy has the best politics. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying